This is the Decarbonization Disruptors Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Cohen. This is episode 14 of our podcast, and I am very pleased to welcome Amrit Robbins, CEO and co-founder of Axiom Cloud. Axiom Cloud's mission is to use software and automation to transform how the world's cooling systems are powered, operated, and maintained in order to generate significant climate and financial impact. Amrit, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Matthew.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. I know you and I have connected before. We've done some business together in the past, which has always been an exciting time, and we really appreciate it. So I know a little bit more about kind of your world and your company than maybe most, but I was excited to kind of get more into detail on kind of what you're doing now and sort of how you see the clean tech world. And I'm always interested in understanding people where their education background is almost like tailor-made for the career that they've chosen. And I saw that you had a background in atmospheric and energy engineering from Stanford. Some would say not a terrible education. And so I was kind of wondering why you chose your career path as early as your college days and how that kind of propelled you into the world you live in now.
Yeah, great question. Climate change has been top of mind for me since high school. And this is kind of a throwback here, but back in high school, my parents took me to go see Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth in like this kind of indie theater in downtown Portland, Maine, when I was, I think maybe like a sophomore in high school or something. And it just rocked my world. It changed everything for me. Kind of starting that night when there was like a little discussion group afterwards, I still remember this. And it was the kind of thing where everything kind of felt like it was coming into focus for me. And I knew this was something I wanted to invest my time and career and life energy into, is climate change. So from there, it was, I started thinking that I was going to use policy to drive change. The idea of the stroke of a pen changing everything through regulation was very, very attractive to me. And went to Stanford originally thinking that, dabbled in some local policy, and then went to Stanford thinking that I was going to focus on political science. And in the very first week, I got some great nudges from other folks who were focused on energy and climate to take a couple of specific intro-level classes that really changed everything for me again. And I switched tracks to engineering. So it was a series of really inspiring and high leverage moments that pushed me to where I am today. Coming out of Stanford with an engineering degree allowed me to then go into a lot of different roles related to energy and climate. And here we are, 10, 15 years later.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really intense, career path that you've taken, and obviously culminating into, your founding Axiom Energy. So I'd love to hear more about kind of how the iterations of Axiom has gone through. I know it started at Axiom Energy, and obviously we're at Axiom Cloud today. So I'd love to hear how about that journey in founding the original Axiom Energy and how that's propelled it to the technology that you're promoting today.
Yeah, coming out of Stanford, I went and worked in an energy services company in Washington, D.C. And the business model there is basically to help customers reduce their energy, their water, their operational spend, and then finance the projects out of the savings that are produced to eliminate that upfront investment. And so when I was there, our largest customer was a major national grocery chain. And that's how I got exposure to this particular, this vertical of retail grocery and came to understand that refrigeration is really the elephant in the room for energy, maintenance, sustainability, operations, and compliance for this entire business model. If you don't have a handle on refrigeration, you're essentially missing the boat in all 5 of those topic areas. And so refrigeration specifically has this kind of double whammy on the sustainability side where it's consuming 60+% of the energy in the entire grocery store. And when you're multiplying that by 1,000 grocery stores, that's absolutely enormous. It's also a very inflexible energy consuming asset. So it's a real grid liability. And then on top of that, it's leaking this incredibly potent greenhouse gas, these HFC refrigerants. So long story short, this particular asset class just has a wealth of opportunities related to climate. And I knew that this is an area that I was underserved, kind of overlooked, really big opportunity that I wanted to focus on. So started a hardware company after that called Axiom Exergy. And the focus there was thermal energy storage. The overall idea was the key unlock to this clean energy future that we care so much about driving toward is not cheaper solar panels. It's not faster deployment of wind turbines, whatever it might be. Instead, there's plenty of really smart people working on those things. Really, the big question now is how do we integrate these intermittent solar, intermittent wind, intermittent electric car charging into our grid without completely destabilizing it, because it's just not meant for that level of fluctuation. And so batteries was very attractive to me, but we realized, my co-founder and I, early on, that there was an opportunity essentially to beat batteries at their own game and provide a lot of grid flexibility by storing something else. So rather than storing energy as chemical potential, we looked at retail grocery and we thought, what are they using most of their energy for? Is to create cooling. And so let's store that cooling service for later use. And so we were freezing and melting tanks of salt water to store refrigeration, to store cooling for later use, which is essentially equivalent to installing a massive lithium-ion battery in a grocery store and charging and discharging it. So we built that company for about 4 years. We put together a great team. We commercialized what we think is a really groundbreaking technology. We developed it. We sold it to Walmart, to Amazon, Whole Foods, deployed a bunch of them, or at least a few of them. And we were going to deploy a bunch more. Ultimately came to realize that this wasn't quite as scalable a business as we had hoped for. And then we got hit by the realities of the pandemic when we went to raise our Series B. I think it was like March 1st, 2020. It was just the worst possible timing. So long story short, we wound down that business, sold the assets, and started something brand new. My conviction was really doubled down on the opportunity in this particular market vertical. And so we started a software-focused company instead called Axiom Cloud. And we were able to leverage a lot of the relationships and trust and goodwill that we had built with stakeholders in the industry at our prior roles in the prior company, as we built this new company from scratch, essentially, technology from the ground up, new product offering from the ground up. And so now we're about four years into that journey. And now we're using exclusively software to serve this vertical, retail grocery, as well as its adjacency, cold storage, warehousing. And we're helping them to, we're essentially applying the data, AI, cloud, automation playbook to their existing refrigeration assets in order to solve the single most painful challenge that they have related to energy, sustainability, operations, maintenance, and compliance. Because again, refrigeration is the whole ballgame for all 5 of those topics.
And talk more about kind of Axiom Cloud's offering today, because I know it has multiple features, which is really unique to your software. Is there one that stands out that clients are most attracted to? What's kind of the secret sauce that allows it to have such a hold on refrigeration management and allow it to really have a huge energy savings?
Yeah, so we do have outcomes-based modules. So if you're the person in charge of energy efficiency, you're probably going to care about our energy efficiency module. If you're the person in charge of sustainability, you're probably going to care about our early leak detection module. And so we have 5 of those modules. We're able to solve really the single most painful problem for each of those 5 key stakeholders sitting at corporate headquarters. And one that I'm most fond of and most excited about is the early leak detection module. This was in beta testing for about a year, and then we released it formally in July, I think, 2023. And now it's in the vast majority of all of our customer sites. Most of our customers are using it today. And I'm really excited to share that releasing that module increased our greenhouse gas impact as a company by a factor of 11, basically overnight. And that's because now, rather than just dealing with the scope 2 energy related emissions of refrigeration, which are big and important, and the flexibility elements of refrigeration on the grid, now we're also dealing with those direct scope 1 emissions of leaking HFC refrigerant gas. And by the way, that gas is 4,000, 3 to 5,000 times more powerful than CO2 from a greenhouse gas standpoint. And it leaks at an astounding rate. The EPA estimates about 25% per year of the gas in a grocery store refrigeration system leaks on average across, the 40,000 grocery stores in the US. So you multiply that high leak rate by the potency of those greenhouse gases, and that's really a standalone climate crisis all on its own. And so we're now able to directly address the root cause of that problem. And it's a really simple approach, honestly. It's basically, hey, today you don't catch leaks. The only time you know when there's a leak is when it's too late. When you've almost completely run out of gas and now you're having temperature issues, the ice cream is melting, et cetera. Our approach is, hey, let's use AI to catch those leaks right after they start. Simple as that. And then let's get them resolved. So not rocket science. The way that we're doing it with AI is really, really cool and unique and differentiated. But ultimately, that's the name of the game, is catch these leaks earlier.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, a really potent solution. What I'd be curious to know is, the grocery industry has been around forever, right? You do get, I'm sure you see, the older buildings, having to be maintained. And I think you're probably seeing this, the grocery industry and kind of the food service industry as a whole, even in cold storage, I mean, their margins are as tight as any industry that we can see. And so what I'm curious about is how you're overcoming, hesitation to get investment from your customers. And for those who say, yeah, it sounds great, I want to save money, I want to help the planet, I want to be more sustainable and more reliable, but I'm already dealing with such a tight margin as it is, labor costs are higher. What are we doing to get over that hump for the companies that have a hesitation? I have a friend who is a owner, his family owns a grocery chain, and it's tough, right? So I'm curious how you're overcoming some of those obstacles.
Yeah, it's really ironic, honestly, a lot of times, because a lot of the really common objections we get, one is like, I'm too far underwater. I'm just, I'm basically I spend all day putting up fires. How can I possibly think about next year? Like, I'm still thinking about, the next 15 minutes and how do I keep my head above water? So that's kind of ironic, because it's the kind of thing where it's like, hey, is this really going to get better next year? Or are you just going to still be doing this? You're still going to be in this really reactive, painful stance next year if you don't do anything about it now. Or the alternative is, hey, let's get ahead of the majority of these problems and eliminate most of these alarms that are happening before they become an emergency. Another really common objection we get is, I don't have money to pay for this. And it's like, that's a real head scratcher for us, because it's like, how can you not afford to do this? How can you afford to not do this? This is the kind of thing where, you put an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, I think is the saying. It's the kind of thing where it's like, hey, you don't have enough money because your maintenance budget is way over. And so the question that really needs to be asked here is, how do we make sure that our maintenance costs are going down? And Axiom is such an obvious solution to that. I mean, again, this is about using data, using AI, using intelligence to direct those activities in a much more intelligent and efficient way. And essentially, the root of it is addressing problems before they become emergencies. And those are, again, across the areas of predictive maintenance, leaks, and energy efficiency, primarily. And so one other really important piece that's created an enormous amount of urgency for us recently has been regulatory tailwinds. So the EPA last week, September 20th, 2024, released the final version of this AMAC subsection H for all the wonks out there who care about this industry. But the bottom line is that the EPA has made this a top 3 enforcement priority for the entire EPA. Regulating HFC refrigerant leaks has become a top 3 priority for this massive government agency from 2024 to 2027. That's a published fact. And this AIM Act is one of the things that they're doing, one of the main things they're doing to help address that. And so really interestingly now, every, these 40,000 grocery stores in the US and, thousands of cold storage facilities, they're now staring down the barrel of a January 1st, 2026 deadline for compliance with this brand new regulation. And installing a solution like Axiom's for early leak detection gets them a lot of the way there in terms of compliance. So it's not the whole thing. There are other elements you still need with reporting and record keeping, et cetera. But in terms of actually detecting leaks and driving down those leak rates, Axiom it's like a tailor-made solution for compliance. And the beauty of it is software-based pricing, so we can roll it out really quickly at a low cost and see a great ROI in the very first year.
And you talked about, how could you not do this as far as a solution? I think you would have a neat perspective on something, which is, how built environment energy efficiency, especially things like leak detection, virtual batteries, things that you're doing, how they can become more prevalent in the overall decarbonization movement. Obviously, you've had funding. There's a lot of PE money out there. There's a lot of investment, but it's sure not the levels of some other industries that we're seeing in the technology space. So what can be done to make it stand out more as a whole, as an industry that deserves funding? Is it more regulatory that you're talking about? Is it kind of a different technology we haven't seen yet that's going to really break the mold? what can be done to really draw more attention to built environment energy efficiency, where we know a huge amount of greenhouse gases is coming from?
That might be a better question, honestly, for our lead investor, Blue Bear Capital, where their entire thesis is climate tech SaaS. So the whole idea is, how do we have a massive climate impact using a SaaS business model with recurring revenue, higher margins, et cetera. And they found some incredible companies out there to invest in. In a biased way, I would say that Axiom is one of those. But ultimately, there's so much opportunity basically to, especially in these legacy industries, apply software, apply cloud, AI, data in ways that are already being done. So for example, the playbook that Axiom's applying to retail grocery refrigeration and cold storage refrigeration, this is not a new playbook. I wish I could say that we designed this out of thin air, but it's not. We're not a cutting edge technology provider. We're not pushing the boundaries on the next generation of LLMs or anything like that. Instead, what we're doing is we're taking a playbook that's already been successfully applied in almost every adjacent industry. Let's use data to make better decisions. And then we're using AI to underpin, we're an AI first company. It's been in our name well before 2020, or well before 2023 or whatever, 2022, when Sam Altman released his first ChatGPT. So I like to say that because we're not we're not just an AI follow-on company. But the whole idea here is that there's so much opportunity to be had with kind of software-based pricing things. We don't have to install a bunch of new hardware. Like, this is not clean tech 1.0, especially in these legacy industries where computers, data, the internet hasn't started to affect these asset classes yet.
What technologies do you see on the horizon in the built environment space that do you think will get more funding over time? What areas in the building do you think can benefit from technology that maybe isn't being adopted as much as they should?
As kind of demoralizing as it is to hear, I think that there's still a pretty significant barrier in the built environment of data access. So, at this point, there are a lot of sensors out there generating a lot of data. There can always be more, of course, but essentially, if that data can be made accessible to companies like Axiom or other folks who are then are able to use that data to do really valuable things on the fronts of maintenance, energy, sustainability, operational optimization, there's just so much opportunity there. But my sense is that, especially in verticals outside of ours, in our vertical, getting access to this data, this is a solved problem. There's enough homogeneity, essentially, that we're able to apply a solution in a really scalable way across thousands and thousands of facilities. But in other verticals, especially kind of the built environment more broadly, like commercial buildings, et cetera, there's so much variation among how the data is accessible, how it's labeled and stored and structured and available behind walls, et cetera, that it comes to the point where it doesn't matter how good your AI is if there's no data to feed it. And getting the data into the AI is not possible. So I think that maybe that's a non-answer to your question, but what technologies are on the horizon? Honestly, I think it's applying current technologies after we get through these data accessibility challenges.
Yeah, and talk about that. I mean, do you think the data accessibility comes from a lack of just technology that's out there? Do you think a part of it is a data center problem, or just capacity? Like, what's the barrier to really unleash data as a resource for energy efficiency?
I think there's a lot of barriers. One of them is IT. So there's so much concern around IT security, rightly so. But it creates massive, massive barriers for getting data in and out of buildings, especially critical building systems. Another key barrier is essentially proprietary, OEM or controller data systems. So, you have certain controller manufacturers or certain OEMs out there who don't want their data to be accessible by third parties. And so, creates a bunch of new barriers with licensing or terms of use, et cetera, that suddenly make it impossible to do this at a scalable way without a lot of friction. And then there's just simply, is the data formatted in a way that can be understood? Is it in the right units? Do we have it in the right intervals? Does the data make sense? And there's so many sensors out there that report data that doesn't make any sense. They're miscalibrated, or they're just wrong, or they installed correctly, et cetera. So that kind of stuff can be solved. It's more of those first two barriers with IT and then OEM data propriety stuff.
It makes sense. I mean, I think what you're doing is, as far as your technology, I think is really going to help move that data along. And I think it sounds like you guys are really having a lot of success implementing your technology, which is great. So in closing, anything else you want to share about what's going on with Axiom Cloud today, what's upcoming that our audience should know and get excited about in the months ahead?
So I would zoom out and say that 2025 is going to be a bumper year for climate and climate tech. And that's because 2020 every year is accelerating, right, in this field, but 2025 I think is going to be especially impactful. And honestly, I think that our particular vertical is going to be a key driver of that growth and acceleration. And that's number one because of this regulatory pressure with the AIM Act that's coming from the EPA, and that's just going to drive a transformation of this vertical. And HFC refrigerant leak rates being regulated and driven down in a significant way. And by the way, when you zoom out and you look at total human greenhouse gas emissions, refrigerant leaks are a really meaningful portion of that pie. Depending on who you ask, it's anywhere from like 3 to 10% of all of human emissions are from refrigerant leaking out of these systems. It's just an astounding amount. And so, 2025 is our year as an industry, at least in the US, to take a major bite out of that emissions profile in advance of this big EPA deadline. And also then you just start thinking about all the other incredible things that are happening in climate tech. I'm just so bullish about climate tech in 2025.
Yeah, it's exciting. One of the motivations to do this podcast was to really shine a light on it, people that I know and that I want to know, so that we can all kind of collaborate together to, make the world a better place and really promote our technology. So yeah, really awesome. And we'll make sure we'll put a link to Axiom's website in the description below, in the video, so people can, come check you out. And again, Amrit, thanks for taking time to speak with me. It was awesome. And this is the Decarbonization Disruptors Podcast, and we will see you next time.